Hello, this is Call Talk for Wednesday, January 6, 2010. Our topic for today is reducing abandon rate, where to start, and what to do. During the call, we invite you to ask questions via email at calltalk@benchmarkportal.com, chat on calltalk.tv if you're listening online, or call in to ask your questions to the host and interact with the show. The number to call in is 347-857-3117. Everyone who asks a question, email, phone, or chat on the show today will receive a free copy of Bruce's book, Benchmarking at its Best, and one person will be chosen at random to win an in-depth reality check benchmark report valued at $1,500. And now I'd like to introduce the host of Call Talk, Bruce Belfiore.
Thank you very much, Sean, and welcome back to Call Talk, and Happy New Year to everyone. I hope everyone listening is once again sober, but not too serious after the holiday celebrations. I know I told my family that my New Year's resolution was to listen more and talk less, to which my son said, fabulous, Dad. My resolution is to talk more and listen less. But hopefully listening today will bring some interesting insights for you. And as most of you know, Call Talk started about 6 months ago and really has grown beyond our expectations in terms of the participants. And the concept has been clear. Discuss topics chosen by the community members in a succinct, info-packed half-hour format with an industry expert in an informal, somewhat lighthearted manner that's short on introductions and long on hopefully useful information presented in bite-sized chunks, one manageable topic per segment every 2 weeks. So to returning listeners, thank you very much for your loyalty, and to the newbies, welcome aboard. Our listeners chose today's topic during the last Call Talk, abandon rate, where to start, what to do. And we have an exciting half hour ahead. But before I introduce my guest, I just want to note that we're asking you to vote both on the topic for next time and also multiple topics for the future so that we can schedule ahead. So please do so today on the website. So anyway, I just wanted to mention with regard to abandon rate, which is, of course, the number of people who drop from a call after they get into the system but before they're able to complete their call, either with a live agent or with your IVR system. I'm reminded of a survey of callers we did a few years ago. And one of the themes that just came back again and again in the comments was that it sort of was the call center equivalent of the old phrase, half of success in life is just showing up. The respondents really were telling us, just be there for me, for Pete's sake. You can't satisfy me if I can't reach you. Well, anyway, to help sort through the do's and don'ts of how to optimize and how to bring your abandon rates as low as possible, I'm delighted to introduce our guest today, Mike Mastro. Mike has worked in our industry for many, many years. We won't say how many, Mike. And he now works with the Primus Group, which he founded. But he's here today as an industry expert to give us some good insights on this area of abandon, not representing any vendor or product, as is our tradition here on Call Talk. So, Mike, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Bruce. It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, great. Well, Mike, let's start out with a general overview from your experience on this issue of abandon.
Okay. Well, on the subject of abandoned, of course, many of us as involved in the call center industry focus around certain KPIs that we manage our call centers with. Typically the one that is at the top of the list is the service level, and then you get down to the lower level ones, of which topic of today is the abandoned. In the abandoned KPI, oftentimes people don't take a deep look at the implications of what an abandoned call really means to an organization. And that's one of the things that over the years, in implementing call centers for many clientele, we focus on it in a various number of ways because it is an indicator in different areas. And so I'd like to start there with kind of at least identifying different places of what what the abandoned KPI really affects in a call center. So I broke it into a couple of sections, and the first one being, of course, staffing. That's the obvious, easy one, which is if we have too high of a rate of abandons, then our staffing levels aren't done correctly and in alignment with our business. The other section, which is a more easier one, which would be more technical, from a technical perspective, we run into situations where there may be problems with the equipment or areas where we're not directing the calls properly. And then finally, we get into a business line with a relationship with the call center. And this oftentimes is the part that I focus on quite often. Give you an example is work a lot with utilities. And in the utility case, you often have situations where the weather creates outages and creates problems that create peaks in call center volumes. And specific in that industry, you get into a situation where the customer, you get a flock of customers that you can't plan for, so no matter all the planning in the world, will never solve the problem. And it's really just a simple solution or a simple answer of, yes, we know we have an outage. So you get into the situation of utilities, the business line actually working with the call center to provide enhancements to technology to make sure that you keep that under control. On the other side of the fence, you got sales. That's a case where you clearly don't want to lose any abandons and you want to drive that number low because a lost opportunity is a lost sale. And oftentimes there's an arrangement between media ads on TV and radio that have to be properly aligned with the call centers. And that's a case where you got to make sure that the marketing department and the operations department are in alignment. So all of this, of course, clearly drives customer satisfaction, and that's one of the things that we all have to pay attention to because that at the end of the day, that's what keeps customers loyal. In general, I would say that for those who are looking for some numbers, in my experience, if you're looking, of course, at a 0 to 1% abandon rate, that's kind of on the extreme low sense that it would be almost impossible to obtain because of the expense and the fact that you're just going to have situations where you're never going to get to that level based upon behavior of the callers. Generally, a 2 to 4% range average is kind of the mark that you look for call center excellence. And when you start getting to 5% and go up, you start getting yourself in a position where you're starting to go out of that range and starting to really want to drive yourself to take a look and understanding what your abandons, why they are occurring. Now, I do want to point out that in addition to this, there's another dynamic, which are peaks, because you're going to have peaks and valleys, and you should really understand not so much the amount of percent of abandons during your peaks, but when they occur and the frequency that they occur. And I say that because you're going to have situations where it's time of day driven, and you're also going to have situations where it's just you have a frequency of occurrences that may be schedule adherence type of issues that you have to address. Now,
so there's some real workforce management and scheduling issues that come into this. And one of the things that you mentioned a little bit earlier, Mike, if I can comment on, was the fact that you don't want to be losing sales on all of this. And I recall a situation that I was involved in, and in fact would like to ask the audience, how many of you can tell us or could tell us what the average dollar value of each call is? If you know that number, take an extra 10-minute break and give yourself a cappuccino because you deserve that reward. When I teach, I oftentimes find people don't know what the value of the call is. And there was one inbound center that took a lot of orders and did a fair amount of cross-selling, and they had an abandon rate, Mike, of over 8% with higher levels during peaks. And call center management did everything it could to make the agents more efficient. They did a good job, but still had a 5 to 6% abandon rate after training, which helped to bring down talk time, but in a way that didn't imperil sales and all that kind of good stuff. And they felt they needed more people. And we did the math, found out that each call was worth about $55 in sales on average, and that an optimization analysis indicated they should have 0 abandon in order to bring the most net value to the company, if you look at both the revenue and the expense side, in terms of what it cost to staff that and in terms of what the revenue into the company was. And what we find is that typically in that situation, the CFO won't believe it at first. They'll balk at raising headcount. But if you put the numbers in front of his or her face, then you can usually get what you want, because it is the right thing to do for the company, the call center, the customers, and actually their careers, because the added revenues and profits to report each quarter are a biggie for the folks in the corner offices. But most senior managers need to have that done because they don't realize how to unlock the value in their call centers. So I'll close the parentheses on that story. Back over to you, Mike.
Okay, and there was one other thing that in alignment with all of this in terms of statistics that I often discuss with customers as well is the average customer contact. So you're discussing the average cost of the call. The other key thing that you need to take a look at is how many times are your customers calling you, because that really affects this whole issue as well. And I'll give example is I think most of us have cell phones, and in the cell phone arena, you run into a situation where you're constantly calling your cell phone provider for one reason or another. So in my particular case, I know throughout the year I have multiple calls to my call center for my cellular phone, in which case I'm actually calling twice or more. So if the average number of abandons is 5%, but the amount of times that your customer base calls you is twice or 3 times, well, that number is actually really 10% or 15%. So there's a hidden KPI here that oftentimes people overlook.
Right. Good point. Good point. You know what? We have a question. I'd like to ask you about the driving factors that you've experienced in this, but we've got some questions that have come in. So, Sean, would you like to introduce one of those?
Yes. David asked, what are some of the proven approaches that can be used to effectively reduce abandon rate?
Okay, good question. Well, first of all, I guess where I usually start with abandons is understanding them and what's driving them. So that's oftentimes where you have to take a look at a couple different areas. One of which, starting with the technology, the easiest thing that I used to deal with a lot in the early days. I don't know if it happens often, but you may have just simple T1 failures that are creating what used to be termed a very fun term called a dingler for those of us technical, which basically just made a phone line go on and off and on and off, and it racked up abandons in a call center. And most call centers have T1s, but it often gets overlooked. It indicates a T1 failure. So, you can get simple stuff like that should always be looked at. And two, a little bit more complicated with the IVR. You step into the IVR and then you start getting into call trees. And oftentimes where we get involved with customers is evaluating the call trees and understanding where calls end up. And when they're misdirected, oftentimes as soon as they get to a misdirected call, they'll end up abandoning and hang up. And then, of course, embedded in the IVR is containment rate that I frankly have seen quite a few people classify containment in the IVR as an abandon, because when your caller actually receives the answer, they hang up. And if your IVR is set up as an ACD and that's buried inside of your ACD queues, well, all of a sudden that satisfied caller, which is actually a positive, becomes a negative as an abandon. So taking a look at the IVR.
So point to the listeners, check your systems to make sure that that's not happening, and that in fact people who are fully satisfied by your IVR, which is a good thing, are not being counted against you on your abandon. Great point, great takeaway, Mike.
And that's one that we do frequently. And then I'll leave with the more complicated one is where you get into the actual data mining, and this is where we get into really sophisticated levels, which is actually probably the best approach to finding systemic problems, is to go into CTI data streams and actually look at it from a CTI level and do. Hello?
Yep, you're still on.
Oh,
everything's
I heard
good.
a click. Sorry. Yep. Go into from a CTI perspective, and you create databases, and then you actually go in and start mining, because once you get the CTI events, you can trace calls and actually do some root cause analysis of what's going on. And I can tell you, when we get into call centers that are dealing with 200 agents on up, you have to deal with raw data at a very high volume, and That's probably the more complicated approach, but that's the way you really get to the root cause.
Okay, so we've got dinglers, we've got call trees, containment rates, mining, all really good things that hopefully people have been able to take notes on and perhaps can utilize as takeaways from this. Yeah, so let's go to the question, the proven approaches that can be used to effectively reduce abandon. I realize you've covered some of those already, but are there some more that we should know about?
Well, the other one is in some respects making sure that you understand, when you understand your business and your call volumes. One of the other approaches that is very typical, which we're all familiar with, is the overflowing strategies of the equipment. In the early days, of course, you kind of staffed up your call center and threw people at it. These days, all of that technology is built into the systems where you can send the calls to different directions. So very frequently, what we all get involved with is cross-training different agents in different groups, such that they can handle at least overflow calls, and then you, at certain intervals, if your mean time to abandon is a minute, then what you can potentially do is overflow a call at 30 seconds to a different skill set, and at least add more agents to the group once it gets beyond the 30 seconds or whatever range you have in your call center. Alternately, when you get into specifically in media-type companies, we do this quite a bit, is you use an outsourcer. And outsourcers are typically servicing many customers, in which case the peaks and valleys get absorbed because the agents that are staffing it are not only staffing your calls, but they're staffing other people's calls as well. So it makes it for a more economical solution, and if that's your business, then that's an approach that we generally get involved with in a lot of cases, specifically for the media. So that's another approach that we generally push. Now, a final one that's coming to the marketplace these days that for the last probably 4 or 5 years has been callback technologies. So with callback technologies, you can take information from the caller, reschedule them for a later date. You can do that either through custom software or through hardware from vendors that can provide the information. But this is kind of a new technology that's entered the marketplace, providing an alternate source of scheduling the callers with your staff at a little bit more convenient time of your staff.
Okay, so for those listeners who may have abandon rates that are above that 5%, 4 or 5% level, and who are looking for ways to bring it down, some of the things that they can do is to virtualize their call center. If they've got a couple of call centers, put them together so they can do load balancing. There's the cross-training, and the cross-training has the added advantage of reducing boredom of call center agents, because if they're cross-trained and they're advancing in their professional skills and also have a more wider variety of calls that come in. And also you can figure out, and we've done this actually for a call center this past year, we figured out what the financial benefit of cross-training was to the call center, and then did a 50-50 share with those people who were cross-trained, so that the company got half of the financial benefit, and half of the financial benefit actually went to the agents and bonuses who were cross-trained and able to do more stuff. So, of course, they had to be certified for it. They had to do a good job at it, but that had that big advantage. You talked about outsourcing, and then this callback technology. And we just did a 1-minute survey that indicates to us that, first of all, the abandon rate on average is around 6% if you look sort of across industry. So really there are quite a few people out there who are having a challenge with abandon rate. And also that this new technology, most people do have, good technology in terms of routing. We found that out, and they're satisfied with that. They have good technology, or reasonably good technology, with regard to workforce management scheduling, although there seems to be some dissatisfaction there as well. And however, with this area of callback technology, it's still not that widely used, still not that widely known. Do you have any further comments on that one, Mike? Because I think we can probably bring some insight to the listeners on that one.
Yeah, in terms of the callback technologies, there's been a number of ways that's been introduced, and in some cases it's probably not as prevalent in the smaller call centers because it is has a stepping stone that's a bit expensive for a smaller call center. But we've implemented over the years technologies in an IVR that lets IVRs to actually do callbacks and schedules to proper queues and such. Mm-hmm. So there are easy implementations that call centers can do themselves. Mm-hmm. They don't require you purchasing equipment from vendors, mm-hmm. but it entails that you get involved and do some work. Mm-hmm. Of course, there's scheduling through the internet, which is a whole other issue that we haven't even touched on, which is people coming in through alternate chat lines and such like that, and mm-hmm. blending those into the queues. Mm-hmm. Actually getting involved with technologies that let people enter their phone number in through a chat line, and that in turn schedules the call of when to call them back. Yep. We've been seeing some of that. Mm-hmm. And then there's easy implementations, which is tap into the CTI data streams to create an approach for a caller, for the customer to get access to the information quite easily, mm-hmm. And call them back and then schedule them at a time.
So there's a lot there. I mean, it's not just the dinglers anymore. We've got a lot of other things that we can do. Sean, you've got some more questions. I guess you've got a lot of questions, so let me hand it back to you.
Well, this next question from Michael actually fits what you were just talking about. Michael asked in an email, I know most of the program will focus on call abandon rates, but last year we added chat as a customer service channel. Mm. Should we have the same abandon rate KPI as we currently do for calls? Mm.
Well, that's a good one. I guess if it was my kid doing it, he'd have a different perspective since he lives on that thing.
Yeah, that's right. There are generational expectations that are different, aren't there, Mike?
It's a huge issue. It's amazing what the younger generation. I guess a quick short story is in order for me to communicate with my kid these days, I got to text them. I can't call them on the same cell phone. They won't answer the cell phone, but they'll answer my text. It baffles me. Yeah. But anyway, to answer the question, that would be an interesting one because I don't know if there's really any statistics on that yet. It is an early stage issue, but if I were to give my opinion, my personal experiences with going through chat, have been that most cases, most call centers can take that technology and outsource it. So oftentimes it's done overseas, and oftentimes it's done with somebody who's handling 4 or 5 different chats at a given point in time as opposed to a one-on-one. So I think we've all experienced that, and we've all experienced having the level of frustration of dealing with going into a chat session and waiting for an answer and waiting and so forth. And then when you finally get mm-hmm. their attention, you can start to work. Yeah. But in general, I would think that the stats would not mirror that of a call because, we're so built around when you call, you expect immediate answers. Mm-hmm. When you do emails and chats, you expect delays. So I think there would be a higher tolerance mm-hmm. for people going in through a chat session, but I don't know what the numbers would be.
Right. Okay. So minutes to abandon would be much longer in the case of chat than in the case of telephone. Well, and I think one of the things that we can say, Sean, too, to Michael and to the rest of the audience is that we're going to be doing more benchmarking in the whole e-services area starting in 2010. That's on the drawing board. So a year from now, we might have more in terms of data. But this is an area where there isn't a lot of data, or there's not a lot of reliable data. So we are going to be digging into it, and hopefully people will be contributing to that. Sean, you got another question?
Yes. Adam asked, if a customer hangs up in the IVR before the service level threshold, i.e. 30 seconds, should that count as an abandon?
Interesting. When you get involved in the IVR, generally speaking, it requires some level of statistical writing to a report that gets normalized, so to speak, with your call center report. And what I mean by that is the IVR is a black box in general sense to the switch. It doesn't know what goes on inside. It just knows that a call goes in and a call comes out or a call hangs up. And what's actually going on inside the IVR is only known by the IVR unless the IVR tells somebody about it. And one of the things that we do with, oftentimes with call centers is write stats. The application will actually write stats to some database external to the IVR that will get normalized before you provide your report to your management. And I use this because in the case of customers that we've dealt with in the utility market that have PUC constraints, that you have to have certain levels of ansons and abandons before otherwise you lose your franchises and so forth. There were a lot of times where the abandon rates were too high, but when we got in and did some analysis to show that, of course in utilities when you have outages that shows abandons, but yet we were telling them that we were satisfying the caller, those were really satisfied calls. So we had to go in and make some modifications to actually reclassify an abandoned call as a satisfied call. And that's not really done through an ACD. It's more or less done as a secondary report that has to get built in with a customer of some form.
Yeah, Mike, if I could add, that's a really good point, one that we struggle with too in terms of how we define it for purposes of benchmarking. And right now we have a broad brush approach, but our statistics committee is looking into whether that should be changed. There's two other aspects that people will bring up. One is if a abandon happens within a certain short period of time, 20, 30 seconds, something like that, it's usually not an indication of somebody being upset or having a problem or something like that, but it could be that the baby starts to cry or that there's something that's come up or another phone that's call that's come in or something like that. So should there be a penalty for that? And so I think that's a point that can be discussed. Right now we do include those in our statistics. The other is a little tougher, and that's dropped calls. With the advent of so many people on cell phones, how many of those calls that are on hold and that are not on hold, that are waiting for somebody to pick up and that drop off are because of cell phone problems? And we had one client in particular that had a lot of distributors through the Midwest and some very rural farming areas. And they said, we know that a lot of what goes on there in terms of these abandons are, in fact, dropped cell phone calls. so that is an issue and one that sometimes has to be addressed. Mike, I don't know if you'd like to add anything more to that.
We've actually experienced that as well, and the way that we've addressed it, and frankly, one of the things to really get into the heart of this is it does take a lot of data manipulation. When we get into the abandons and starting to get root cause, it's not just a simple report from the switch. You have to really get into the heart of the matter. And in that particular example that we've experienced, we actually saw that, of course, that caller will call back immediately. So what you get is, in some respects, an Annie calling back, within a minute, calling back into the center or something of that nature that you can then glean through the data and say, okay, go in, find all repeat callers that fall within this range, and take those numbers and reclassify them.
Exactly. Great. And that's how you sort of turn all this data into real business intelligence and don't get going down the wrong road as a result of the data that you may be presented on a broad brush basis. Okay, that's great.
And I think what I'd like to just mention on that subject before, because I think we're running out of time here, the whole process of doing this data mining for the abandons, once you jump into that realm of understanding callers' behavior and mining of the data, it really, you may be focused on abandoned today, but it really overlaps, and it's not a subject of our conversation, but the same data would apply for first call resolution, which is another hot topic, because now that you have the data and you're understanding how to mine it and capture it, well, you now have the ability to start looking forward and seeing first call resolution issues because it's the same data that you're looking at, just in a different direction.
Yeah, interesting. Very, very true. Very true. Okay, Sean.
All right. Our last question comes from Kenny. Kenny asks, in a low call volume environment, how can you maximize your ability to lower abandon rate when the length of the call is the largest factor.
Okay, and we are going to go a little bit over here, but I think it's been there's been a lot of questions, right, Sean? So we've wanted to satisfy as many as possible. And okay, so Mike, would you like to answer that question?
Sure. I think the first to start off with in a low volume call center, one of the callback technologies starts to become reasonable approach, but you have to be careful because there's some that are expensive, and in that particular case you can create a scheduling environment in the IVR, where the IVR might actually get data from your switch to see what the is that okay?
Yeah, just sorry about that.
Oh, sorry.
The IVR can actually capture queue data from the switch to know what the average call lengths or the queue lengths are, and if it's 10 or 15 minutes, and actually get a phone number from the caller and say, you can call them back. So, depending on the environment, whether or not you have that ability, that's one approach that we've done. And then, of course, you call the person back with the IVR, so you don't need any fancy technologies, and then just push them into the queue. The other approach, of course, is doing overflows, which is very typical in a smaller environment because you don't have the luxury of the Erlang calculations to spread out the waiting time. So you oftentimes have to do some level of overflow. Whether it be to an outsourcer, which might be expensive at small volumes, more likely it's to a supervisor or some staff that doesn't generally take calls but does during those periods.
Or perhaps to a virtual agent that belongs to your organization but happens to be off-site and is a little more flexible in terms of time.
Very good point. We've done that with home agents as well, which is, in the early days, was something that everybody was afraid of, but these days it's quite prevalent.
Okay, great. Great information. Okay, Sean, over to you.
I wanted to thank our co-host today, Mike Mastro, for all his great insight in the show. Thanks for all the questions from participants. It was a really great show. The questions that we didn't get to, we will respond via email. Don't forget, you can sign up for our reality check to see how your abandon rate compares to peers in your industry. Our winner today of the in-depth reality check is Adam. Adam, please send an email to calltalk@benchmarkportal.com so we can get you your $1,500 report. And the topic for the next show, I just have to pull up the vote that everyone voted on, was, sorry, I have to refresh the screen. After call work time, how to minimize and still have great customer records. So that'll be the show. Our next show is scheduled for January 17th. Thank you, everyone, for attending our show today, and have a great day.